Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and today I'm going to talk about astrological schools and lineages. This is going to take a certain amount of background. Again, this is sort of concepts that people are probably not familiar with. I think they're very traditional, though they're very useful to understand, and I think they're useful tools. We don't want to have them turn into straitjackets, though. We also don't want them to turn into some sort of pejorative, name calling or anything like that. It's just really a tool for understanding, and there's a lot of flexibility, and obviously individuals can differ on that. In a sense, we're talking about horizontal versus vertical. I mean, you might see a school as the current manifestation with a lot of people. I said, and that's also collective versus individual. But let's just sort of dive in. First of all, school of astrology. Really what I'm talking about here is a school of thought. I'm not talking about some sort of formal organization or university of astrology. I'm talking about a school of thought. And so I'll just quote directly from Wikipedia. Wikipedia says a school of thought is intellectual tradition is a perspective of a group of people who share common characteristics of opinion or outlook or of a philosophy or discipline. So essentially, this is not just limited to methods and techniques. It's really a matter of common philosophy. Whether people realize it or not, they share a common philosophy, common assumptions, and a common approach. It's probably more important than the individual techniques, as we're going to see as we go into it. Now, this raises a sort of unique modern problem, which is that the sort of view is that labels are whatever I want them to be. And if I label something, it automatically changes it to that thing. So again, as we're going through this, I'm not trying to do this as laudatory or pejorative. In other words, I'm not just saying X is good or Y is bad. I mean, obviously I'm going to be biased. I'm in the Middle Renaissance school. I'm in certain lineages. And so obviously I like those, but I like them the same way I like vanilla ice cream over chocolate ice cream. I mean, it's a question of preference. It's a question of what fits me. It's not a question of objectively this is the best or the better than everything else. So, we'll try to keep that in mind as we walk through the video. But labels are useful. And labels are useful when the label corresponds to the thing it refers to, and it's not just sort of undifferentiated chaos. If you say, go to the store and get me some milk, and the person comes back with wine, and it says, I consider this to be milk, the changing the label doesn't change the nature of the thing. And again, I'm not saying the wine is bad, I'm just saying I just don't want to put it on my cornflakes. So again, there's a certain amount of flexibility with the labels, but when you get to the point where you're just arbitrarily saying, like I said, I'm a cowboy, okay, fine, you're a cowboy. Or I'm a traditional astrologer, I see that a lot. And it's like of people that are otherwise completely modern, but they like the labeling of traditional. It's like, that's fine, but it does get kind of confusing. So the next kind of confusing thing for people is this idea of schools of astrology. Really, I think the main idea is there's just undifferentiated astrology. It's basically all the same thing. If you ask somebody what type of astrology they practice and they say astrology, well, basically what that means is modern, natal, psychological astrology. That's as far as the people that are practicing it and what's being done for the most part, it's very heavily modern psychological natal astrology. Kind of reminds me of the movie The Blues Brothers. Of course, shows my age. There's a scene where they go into this roadside bar and they ask the bartender, said, what kind of music do you have here? And the bartender answers, we have both kinds, country and western. And there's just really a lack of understanding that, that there's a difference between the type of astrology that we're doing, which is modern, and then, what people might be doing in different places or different periods of time. So I guess there's sort of an idea that ancient astrologers are doing sun sign monthly forecasts and looking at archetypal forces and natal charts, and that's really the same things that we're doing now. So if we look at, as I said, schools, and these are just schools of thought, common approaches, and common philosophy, again, the most predominant is going to be, in terms of numbers and influence, is going to be modern astrology. And the key, I think, here is the philosophy is essentially unconscious or maybe even conscious atheistic materialism. In other words, the causality of astrology is a scientific causality. I mean, many people believe that. So in other words, it's magnetism or electrical fields or quantum entanglement or something like that. Alternatively, people will talk about it's symbolic, which that's confusing. Same thing with synchronicity. I mean, Jung said synchronicity was an acausal connecting principle. In other words, it's a black box. It's like it works, but I don't know how it works. That doesn't get us anywhere. So really, if we're going to push beyond scientific causality, people say, okay, yeah, it's not magnetism. They're still going to be conceiving it in some terms of beams or energy or rays or something like that. So it's very, very strongly influenced by atheistic materialism. But for the most part, people aren't aware of that. They either don't think about the causality or they automatically assume, like I said, it's some scientific causality, because what else could it be? I mean, that's all there is. Modern astrology is also very heavily focused on natal charts, to the point that people are not even aware. I mean, horary astrology that looks at charts of questions is often a surprise to people. I mean, typically when I do a horary question for people will give me their natal chart as well, even though it's not used in a horary reading. I mean, this is not their fault. It's just that what they're exposed to is just so heavily natal that's hard to understand that there's other things outside of it. Modern astrology is also very, very psychological. And so, again, the planets are taken as being internal psychological forces. The way things work is through psychology. That's the predominant focus for it. And again, very useful. I mean, I do a lot of psychological natal astrology. I got that from modern astrology. I've integrated it into my traditional practice. And I think it's, as far as I'm concerned, a really great and useful part of my astrological practice, and one of the great things about modern astrology. It's also very positive. I mean, the focus again it comes from more of a counseling focus, psychological focus, so it's much more positive, and it's for the most part not predictive. I mean, there are people that are trying to do predictions, but the whole focus of it is upbeat, positive, in terms of allowing you to be able to choose things that you go your way. It's not fate-based. That's really upsets people, but it's providing ways to do what you want, be the kind of person you want to be, and to support you and give you positive and upbeat and reassuring, understanding of things. All good, but that's a particular approach, and that's this is an oversimplification, but this does, I think, hit a lot of the essential nature of the thing. In terms of technique, it's extremely eclectic. Modern astrology, the view is that, and if they don't typically think about it, but this is the approach that's followed. The unconscious assumption is that all astrological techniques are equally usable and work by themselves. So you can sort of go into any other type of astrology, take one technique off, and then you can stick it into your own practice, and it works perfectly well. And so you can sort of assemble your own, it's like a tinker toy approach. You can assemble your own method by combining techniques. But because the underlying approach is the same and the underlying assumptions are the same, a lot of these, what people think are unique approaches, are actually just variations on these same themes. And we'll see that it's true of other schools as well, is that, in fact, people are not unique. People are following the methodology in the school and expressing that. It's just the question is whether they're aware of it or not aware of it. So another very important school is Hellenistic astrology. Hellenistic astrology originated in Babylonian Chaldea. This is the astrology of the Greeks and Romans. This is predictive, very fate-based. We do have somewhat of a mix of spiritual material. I mean material in the sense of elemental causality. Ptolemy was, hot, dry, earth, air, earth, fire, and water. You saw that as in heat and cold as being a key element of the causality. But ultimately, spiritual causality was the ultimate basis of things. That was more than matter and energy. There was also spiritual, and that was primary. Hellenistic astrology includes natal astrology, but also horary, electional, and mundane astrology. Mundane is looking at weather or countries or long periods of history. Hellenistic astrology is a specific set of techniques and assumptions and everything that all work together. And so they don't really have a tinker toy approach. They have a lot of techniques that sort of develop together. It's essentially like a language. And so they're not taking, nouns from German and adverbs from Spanish and adjectives from French and sticking them together. They're saying, essentially speaking language. And that is one way to think about the schools, as sort of as a language. Hellenistic astrology has really experienced a resurgence. People like Robert Schmidt was probably one of the people that helped get it going. Chris Brennan is, very well known and very popular. There's many other people involved. I'm very ignorant, so again, I'm going to apologize if I didn't cover people. I mean, I just don't know much about the subject in terms of that, in terms of the specific people, and there's many, many people of all sorts of different sorts of diverse community, again, that I wish I knew more about, and I would give their names, but I don't, and that's, again, a matter of my lack of knowledge. But an important school and something that's having a lot of impact, and it certainly provides, again, many modern astrologers will, study Hellenistic techniques and then use it in their own practice. They'll take, parts of it out and use it. So the school that I am most strongly associated with is medieval Renaissance European astrology. And obviously I'm biased in favor of it, but like I said, I'm biased in favor of it, that I like chocolate over vanilla. It doesn't mean it's the best for everybody. It just means that it's the one that I was drawn and resonates with me. Medieval Renaissance originated in the advanced Islamic civilization of the Middle East in the 8th and 10th centuries. Was this really brilliant synthesis of Hellenistic and Persian astrology with some Vedic mixed in. Very predictive, fate-based, the same mix of spiritual and material causality, but again, ultimate basis is spiritual. Again, natal, horary, electional, and mundane techniques, and once again, a specific set of techniques that work together. It was revived originally as the Barclay horary lineage, and we'll talk about these lineages later. There's also the Zoller natal and the Warnock astrological magic lineages that are part of the medieval Renaissance school. So then another very important school of astrology is Vedic astrology. Again, this is the traditional astrology of India. It's integrated into their traditional ritual and spirituality. Once again, predictive, fate-based, ultimate basis is spiritual. Once again, natal, horary, electional, and mundane techniques, and once again, a specific set of techniques that work together. So these are essentially, when we're looking at schools, like I said, you could think of them as different languages. And that's sort of my approach. Now that's antithetical to the modern approach, because the modern approach is that everything is separate, everything can be combined. But as I see the schools, there are essentially different ways of using astrology, different parts of astrology that have techniques that work together and have been developed together, and that really, I think if you're going to take them all apart, then you're a modern astrologer. So that would be my approach to it. So again, there's other schools, Chinese, Tibetan, things like that. I'm not familiar with those schools. So, but I think that those traditional schools are going to follow along and be similar to the traditional European or the Vedic astrology in many, many ways. Modern is really the outlier in terms of being an unconscious atheistic materialism as its basis for causality, and being so eclectic in combining all these different techniques without having a set of techniques that it uses, predominantly from its own development. So schools, these are sort of the major, organization. I mean, pretty much everybody falls into a particular school. And if you don't know what school you're in, you're modern astrologer for the most part. Lineages are the next thing that I want to talk about. So lineage is important in the modern assumption is going to be, and this is not necessarily from astrology, but it also shows up in modern astrology, is it's very impersonal. I mean, the way that we teach and we organize things is on a very much of a mass standard. We have a bureaucratic approach. We have these large organizations. We have standardization, mass education, mass organizations, hierarchy, licensing, certification, things like that. So again, for example, my other career, I'm an attorney. In order for me to be an attorney, I had to first go to high school, graduate from that. I had to then go to college, do 4 years of college, and then graduate from that. Then I had to get into law school, go to law school, graduate from law school. I then had to pass the bar and get admitted to the bar. And then the bar has this whole, the regulatory mechanism. I get audited to check my books. I have to take this continuing legal education. If I commit an ethical violation, I can be reported to the bar. And so there's this whole very complex organization set up, and only a few people can be lawyers if you have to follow through the whole process. And it's essentially this government regulated, or it's done on a mass scale by organizations. I mean, so this is different from the traditional approach. In the traditional approach, what you would have had would be small groups of teachers, a teacher and then a small group of students or disciples. They would have had these chains of transmission. So in other words, you would say, well, my teacher was this and their teacher was this person, back and back and back to a, typically sort of mythical founder. I mean, whether they really existed or not, who knows? But that was very much of more of a personal method, individually taught, and there's very much of a sense of passing it on from teacher to student in these chains of transmission. So, I mean, this certainly is in existence in modern astrology. There's lots of modern teachers out there that have their own individual approach within the modern school that have students that teach them, and then the students carry on that approach. I have a friend who was a student of Jeffrey Wolf Green, who's a modern astrologer, and again, that's good example of a lineage. And there's many, many more. Again, I'm not knowledgeable about it. I wish I could give some more examples, but there's certainly people out there in the modern school that have lineages. That's definitely going on. I'm going to talk a bit about medieval Renaissance lineages because those are the ones that I know about, medieval Renaissance astrology. The original lineage, and this is in the 80s, was in the medieval Renaissance was started by Olivia Barclay. Olivia Barclay had done modern horary astrology and got a hold of a copy of William Lilly's Christian astrology and was really taken with that and began teaching it. And so she set up the QHP. In England, they like to put letters after their name. That's just sort of a thing they do. If they have a degree, they put it on their name. So that they were giving these QHPs. And that's what that qualified horary practitioner lineage. This includes people like Deb Holding, Sue Ward, John Frawley, Lee Lehman. Lee Lehman was my teacher. And so, I'm, again, part of that lineage for horary, and my students are also part of that lineage. This has been very, very influential. I think a lot of the prestige for traditional astrology derives from the QHP lineage. You've got a lot of very high quality people. Horary is a really excellent predictive technique. They're working from an amazing source. Lilly's Christian Astrology is a really well written, does an incredible job of summarizing many of the other sources and gives lots of examples. And Lilly was the foremost horary practitioner of his day, and well respected for that. And then the other thing about horary is that it's self-correcting, because as a professional horary astrologer, you're typically going to be making lots of predictions in advance without knowing the outcome, and you're going to get results back from people. And so that really keeps you online as an astrologer. Essentially, you're repeatedly testing your predictive technique against reality. And so you have, so again, you're starting from a great source and a really valuable methodology. And also the tendency with horary, again, is to test it. So that's what I think, like I said, a lot of the prestige of the lineage has come from the fact that this is a really high quality, teaching and technique that's going on there. The next lineage is the Zoller natal lineage. Okay, so that's Zoller, Robert Zoller, unfortunately deceased. He got a hold of a copy of Guido Bonatti's Liber Astronomia. This was really the great source text for Renaissance astrologers, but many medieval astrologers as well. And Zoller's focus was on natal. And so he had a very strong philosophical background, very spiritual approach, spiritual causality, and a very deep understanding of the philosophical background, as well as the historical background. He translated, big chunks of Liber Astronomia of Bonatti, and then he taught that. So that lineage was then carried on by Ben Dykes, who's done an amazing job of done all sorts of translations of the Arabic, the early medieval Arabic text, as well as a translation of Bonatti's Liber Astronomia, which is fabulous. And then, for example, I think my prediction is that the next leading light in that Zoller lineage, natal lineage, is going to be Michael Beeson. He's a student of mine, but also a student of Ben Dykes, and has been doing some amazing work with natal predictive astrology. So really, really incredible. Zoller also had a less, I mean, the Zoller natal lineage, he taught classes, he had his diploma course. I mean, he had his students, whenever I meet someone who graduated from his full course, they're always very impressive. They have a great background and they all know their stuff. The magical stuff, Ziller was a little more underground with. He taught me essentially the philosophy of magic. I mean, I have that in my astrological magic course. I have one of my lessons comes from him. So the teachings that he taught me, I passed on. To my knowledge, Zoller did not formally initiate anybody. I've seen these claims that people are saying they were initiated by Zoller. I find that highly suspect. I was never formally initiated. I mean, he taught me, but I never had any sort of ceremonial or ritual. And as well, he wasn't teaching any practical magic whatsoever. In fact, Zoller had me make talismans for him when I got into talismans, but it's not something that he was willing to do himself. So that sort of leads into then the next medieval Renaissance lineage, which is my astrological magic lineage. So essentially, having revived the practice of traditional astrological magic, I then began teaching it. So that lineage consists of my students, and then I can see that I've had a wider influence over many other astrological magic practitioners, and I think that's typical of lineages. That they're going to be people that are that not necessarily become part of that lineage, but are influenced by it or receive the knowledge from it. So I'm very big on lineage. When I started teaching at my courses, I didn't even have certificates because to me the most important thing was, well, who was your teacher? And essentially that person's vouching for you. They finished my course. This is my student. This is somebody I have respect for. They know their stuff. But people started asking for certificates, and I was fine. I'm like, sure, so I have these really nice certificates that I give out. But I think that points up a big difference between the sort of modern approach and the traditional stuff, is that there is a sort of desire to have some sort of outside body, and to have this certification and licensing and all that sort of stuff, and then somehow that's going to make sure that everything's, that's going to control things. Essentially what it does is it sets up a guild system. I mean, lawyers are a perfect example of that. I mean, you cannot, no matter how much you know about law, you can't practice unless you're an attorney. So it really restricts the number of people that can do it. And then, it's a means of control as well. And it ends up, I mean, a good example that happened with the esoteric field was yoga. My wife was involved with that. It was about 20 years ago. When she started, you could just start up and do your own thing. It got to the point where, they had these like weekend courses to take, and they had these certificates you could get, and then the government started jumping in and taxing people. So it really became a way of, like I said, restricting access, and then a government control and taxation. So I'm a little bit, and then the problem is like with attorneys, you have to have all these qualifications and have, bar and all that sort of stuff, and they have this big ethical structure, and that means no one's ever ripped off or gets bad advice from a lawyer. Oh, oops, that's not actually true. So I mean, the ostensible purpose of it, I mean, maybe it helps. I suppose it does. It certainly doesn't, fulfill it 100% its entire purpose of, the regulation certification. So the traditional approach, like I said, was to focus on this idea of individual teachers and students and this teacher-to-student transmission. And there's a really spiritual element to it, of this whole idea of the golden chain of hermetic transmission. So that's certainly, I'm very proud to, none of the stuff that I do did I invent. This is all essentially, I'm a link in the chain. And so I'm very proud to be part of the horary, the QHP lineage. That's important to me. The Zoller, the philosophical stuff was extremely important to me in my astrological magic stuff, and I'm also very proud to have revived astrological magic. Again, certainly didn't create it, but making it accessible to people and restarting that student-to-teacher lineage and transmission again. So I really hope that my students will continue to function in the lineage, teach and pass that on, and this wonderful esoteric knowledge will continue to percolate. So as I look at that, like I said, this is really intended as a means of understanding. It's sort of like a natural philosophy. It's taxonomy. We're going out and we're looking at these various animals and we're classifying, looking at the behavior and things like that. And that's again what I would say about the astrological schools and lineages is like they exist. It's not a question of good or bad, of one being better than the other. They all have their advantages and disadvantages. Like I said, I'm a big fan of the psychological natal astrology. I find it very effective. But I do think that the schools need to be taken on their own terms and understood on their own terms. And I think it's very useful to actually practice in a school and constantly understand what you're doing. And so then what you can do is look at what's available, find the one that resonates for you, and that will be the best choice for you. And nobody can come in and say that's right or wrong. But it is good to know and be conscious of what we're doing and to be conscious of the influence of the schools and conscious of the influence of lineage. So I hope you find that useful and interesting. And I look forward to doing more videos in this area and then again, passing out my school and lineage.